Next up, we have Trading Networks with Frictions by Ravi Jagadeesan.
This is joint work with my co-authors Tamás Fleiner, Jankó, and Teytelboym. This is a paper about positive analysis of equilibrium in trading networks with frictions like commissions or sales taxes. The starting point is a question about what's the right solution concept in this type of market. In thick markets with homogeneous goods, a natural choice of solution concept is competitive equilibrium. In thin markets, competitive equilibrium is not really well-founded because it may not be reasonable to assume that agents take prices as given. One approach to thinking about thin differentiated markets is to use various different cooperative solution concepts. The question that we address in this paper is what is the relationship between competitive and cooperative solution concepts in thin differentiated markets? The rationale for asking this question is that if we know that competitive and cooperative solution concepts produce the similar or the same predictions, then we can apply the same solution concept to different market thicknesses. A partial answer to this question has been given by Hatfield commoners Nikifor, Ostrovsky, and Westkamp, the authors of the next paper in this session. And what they showed is that when, with quasi-linear utility and no frictions in the market, competitive equilibria essentially coincide with outcomes that satisfy a cooperative solution concept called stability. What we do in this talk is to relax the assumption that there are no frictions. So what we do is we develop a model of differentiated markets with frictions, and we show an equivalence between competitive equilibrium and a suitably adapted cooperative solution concept. We capture differentiation in a trading network. And our cooperative solution concept is based on stability. And one of the key insights is that myopia and limited commitment power by agents can prevent them from cooperating to circumvent frictions. So the outline of this talk is as follows. I'll start out by describing the model. I'll then present some illustrative examples to show how frictions can affect equilibria in differentiated markets. And I'll conclude by explaining our equivalence result. Most of the talk is really going to be on these examples because I think they illustrate our results better than just stating them. So let me start with the model. The model is based again on this Hatfield et al. Model, including on the next paper. So there are finitely many firms. The firms interact via a set of trades and transfers. And these trades are exhaustively specified, and each trade specifies the non-pecuniary aspects of a transaction. So two examples to keep in mind are a job contract without a salary in a labor market and a good plus who's selling and who's buying. So trades are all bilateral and counterparty specific. What this allows us to capture is the fact that not everyone may be able to trade a particular good. It may be that only a few agents in a market can sell a good and only a few other agents can buy it. So that's the way the differentiation and thinness is captured in our model. We're assuming that trades are bilateral. I mean, with goods, I think this is a relatively mild assumption. And what a prediction of the model is, an outcome, so to speak, is a set of realized trades as well as the prices at which they're realized. So to be a little bit more formal, for every pair of firms f and f prime in our model, there's a finite set omega f to f prime of trades from f to f prime. So each trade you should think of as an edge in a directed graph going from f to f prime. In this context, f is the seller, f prime is the buyer, and you can imagine that omega is some good, that maybe f is producing or buying from somewhere else, and f prime is buying and either consuming or using in production later. We denote by omega the set of all trades in the economy. The key way in which our model differs from standard models is that we assume that forms of transfer are trade-specific. So firms have utility functions defined over two things: the set of trades that they participate in and the vector of transfers that they receive for all trades. We assume that utility is increasing and continuous in transfers. That's just saying that people like money. The key friction in our model is that transfers are not perfectly substitutable. So utility can depend on the entire vector of transfers, not just on the sum. And what that's going to allow us to capture is things like commissions, sales taxes, and other frictions that prevent costless exchange. So to understand why, consider a proportional transaction tax, where firms lose lambda fraction of any payment that they made. You could imagine this is a commission as well. That's going to be the same, or some reduced form for incomplete markets. But anyways, the utility function to keep in mind to capture this situation is that utility is value of the set of trades you're making. So utility of a set xi of trades and a transfer vector t is the value of xi plus the post-tax net transfers that the firm receives. So when the transfer is positive, you don't get the full transfer. You only get 1 minus lambda fraction of it. Whereas when the transfer is negative, you're making a payment, and you lose the full value of the transfer. So there's this kink in utility as a function of good-specific transfers. And there's an asymmetry between payments and receipts. That asymmetry is what captures frictions in our model. Our notion of equilibrium is essentially standard. So competitive equilibrium consists of two things: a set of realized trades, which you denote by xi, and a vector of prices, p, which specifies a price for every trade in the market. And the utility maximization condition is that firms should maximize utility given prices by choosing the set of trades in xi in which they participate. So formally, the set of trades in xi that f participates in should maximize f's utility over all sets psi of trades, and the transfers that one gets are going to depend on both psi and on the prices p. And the way that they depend on this is, well, you get paid the price of every good that in which you act as a seller. You have to pay the price of any good that you buy, and there are no transfers made for unrealized trades. On the other hand, keep in mind that we're specifying prices for all trades, including unrealized ones. So the way you should imagine this is that firms have some beliefs about what prices they could obtain trades at. But those are not things that we observe. And in fact, our cooperative solution concept is only going to depend on things that we can observe. So the realized trades in the market, the prices of realized trades in the market. So now let me go to some examples to illustrate how frictions affect equilibrium. So the most basic example you can imagine is there's two firms, and there's two trades between them. So F1 and F2. F1 is selling zeta to F2, and F2 is selling psi to F1. These firms cannot sell without buying or buy without selling. So both are neither. They get zero utility from doing nothing, $10 of value from trading, and there's a transaction tax of 10%. And I'm going to restrict, for sake of simplicity, to equilibria in which the prices of these two trades are equal and non-negative. If the price is low enough, so below 100, one is going to obtain trade in equilibrium. Why? Well, basically, the only thing that firms have to pay is the transaction tax. And if the price is below 100, they're going to be spending at most $10 each on taxes. And so they're going to be willing to trade, because the value that they get from trading is $10. On the other hand, if the price is large, so if it's above $100, firms would have to pay too much tax in order to trade. So in fact, one will not obtain trade. That is, there'll be autarky in equilibrium. So there are basically two possible things that can happen in equilibrium, either trade or no trade. Both are possible, unlike in settings without frictions. Note that among these equilibria, firms prefer the equilibrium in which the prices of both goods are zero, because in that case, they don't pay any taxes. And all the other equilibria are Pareto-dominated. This is, again, something that cannot happen without frictions. Right? We have the first welfare theorem. But the first welfare theorem does not apply in this model. The second example illustrates a more stark kind of inefficiency that can happen. Right? In the first example, some equilibria are good, but others are not. In the second example, all the equilibria are going to be inefficient. So we enrich the economy by adding an outside option. So there's this firm F3 that F1 can sell to instead of F2. So formally, there's a trade going from F1 to F3, zeta prime, which is a perfect substitute for the trade zeta going from F1 to F2. And F1 can only make one of these trades, can't make both. And F3 is willing to pay a lot. So F3 is willing to pay $300 to buy from F1. Let's maintain the transaction tax of 10%. So I claim that there's no equilibrium with trade. Why is this? First, let me explain why zeta prime can't be realized in equilibrium. Well, F1 cannot sell zeta prime without buying psi. So if F1 wants to sell to F3, it has to buy from F2. But in order for F2 to sell to F1, it needs to buy from F1. Right? So in order for zeta prime to be realized, psi must be realized. But for psi to be realized, zeta must be realized. And zeta prime can't both be realized, right? Because F1 can only sell once. So that means zeta prime can't be realized in equilibrium. Therefore, its price must be high enough that F3 doesn't want it. Price must be at least $300. Now, if zeta is realized, it must be that F1 prefers to sell to F2 over F3. Otherwise, F1 would sell to F3 instead. So that means that the price of zeta must be even higher. It must be, so in particular, at least $300. But if the price of zeta is above $300, that means at least 10% of that price, or $30, is lost to taxes. And that exceeds the gains from trade between F1 and F2, which is only 10 plus 10, or $20. So that means basically the only possible equilibrium is autarky. And in fact, if all the prices are high and equal, say $350 or even higher, one is going to obtain autarky. So there are equilibria, but in all equilibria, there's no trade. So what's going on here is that adding an outside option, that is this F3, is raising the price of zeta. And that causes heavy losses in trade between F1 and F2, and therefore disrupts the market. That's something that can only happen with frictions, right? Normally, if there weren't frictions, adding in the outside option would raise the price of zeta, but then basically the prices of zeta and psi would just both be high, and one would still end up with trade. But the transaction taxes are messing everything up. So now to come up with a cooperative solution concept that coincides with equilibrium, agents need to not be able to get around the frictions. And so what I'm going to do in the rest of the talk is basically explain how to build such a cooperative solution concept. To put things into context, let me recall some standard cooperative solution concepts and explain why they don't coincide with equilibrium in this setting. Most basic solution concept is the core. Right? What this does is it rules out deviations by agents with full commitment power, where when some agents want to form a blocking coalition, they lose all trade with the outside world. So if Scott and I get together and block, I don't get to retain my existing trades with Mohammed. What happens in this economy is that there are core outcomes, and moreover, there's trade in every core outcome. So the interesting part is why it's possible for F1 and F2 to trade in a core outcome. And the reason is that if F1 and F2 are trading, well, how could F1 and F3 try to block? F3 could say to F1, well, I'm willing to pay you a lot. But F1 won't take that offer, because in order to take that offer, he'd have to stop buying psi from F2, and then wouldn't be willing to sell to F3. So this is not going to coincide with competitive equilibrium, because we can obtain trade, whereas equilibria are the only equilibrium outcome is autarky. The second solution concept, which is from the matching literature, is called stability. This is a solution concept obtained by cooperation between agents who don't have the ability to commit, but who do have some foresight. So to be a little bit more precise, it rules out deviations by agents with limited commitment power, where agents don't lose access to their existing trades if they deviate. So if Scott and I deviate, I get to still retain my trades with Mohammed. And this is the concept that in worlds with quasi-linear utility and no frictions coincides with competitive equilibrium. Now, it turns out in this example, no stable outcomes exist. And here's why. First, note that autarky is not stable. Why? Because F1 and F2 can then join together and agree to make trade between themselves and form a block. Now, why is trade unstable? Well, if F1 and F2 are trading, F3 can come in and offer to buy from F1 at a very high price, and F2 can then, based on this solution concept, retain trade psi, but drop trade zeta. So F1 can suddenly say to F2, no, I'm not going to sell to you, but I'm still going to buy for you. And that's going to give a block. Right? So F1 and F3 will be able to block because in this way. There are no stable outcomes then. And well, if you want predictions, we have to change the solution concept. So the solution concept that we use is something that we call trail stability. In addition to limited commitment power, we're going to put in some myopia for the agents. So the thing you should imagine is that blocks are developing by some dynamic process where in each step, agents propose one trade. And agents don't anticipate the future consequences of proposing trade. So I can propose a trade to Shengwu. That may cause Shengwu to propose a trade to Mohammed, and Mohammed to propose a trade to me. But I don't anticipate that this is going to happen when I'm making the initial offer to Shengwu. And that myopia is going to be, it's what's going to make autarky trail stable in this example. So autarky turns out to be the unique trail stable outcome. The interesting part is why it's trail stable. So F1 and F2, you could imagine, could try to get together in autarky and form a block. But they're each only willing to make one trade if they get the other. And so if only one contract is proposed in each step, neither one is going to be willing to start out the dynamic process to obtain a block in which both trades are made. Right? So F2 is not going to be willing to offer to sell F1 psi without understanding that F1 would then offer to sell zeta to F2. And with myopia, then no block can emerge. So keep in mind that autarky was also the unique equilibrium outcome in our model. So this example illustrates the general phenomenon that there's a coincidence between trail stability and competitive equilibrium outcomes. So at this point, I'm going to tell you what the main results are and conclude. So our result is the following. Assume that all goods in the model are grossly substitutable and some other mild regularity conditions, which I'm not going to address. Under these conditions, an outcome is trail stable if and only if it can be supported in competitive equilibrium by pricings. What this result does is it has two consequences, basically. First, it provides a cooperative foundation for competitive equilibrium in thin markets. That is, any competitive equilibrium, if you take a competitive equilibrium outcome, agents who are myopic and lack commitment power won't be able to deviate from it. The second part is that this result provides competitive foundations for trail stability. So in order to obtain a trail stable outcome, you can ask, well, how would agents get there in the first place? One way to get there is to use prices. So prices can help to coordinate agents on a trail stable outcome. And those are basically the two interpretations of this result. You might ask what happens without frictions. So it turns out without frictions, even if there are income effects, stable outcomes are going to coincide with outcomes that can be supported in equilibrium. So these two results illustrate the difference between stability and trail stability and the role of myopia in obtaining a cooperative solution concept that coincides with equilibrium with frictions. Without frictions, competitive equilibrium is equivalent to the cooperative solution that's obtained by agents who are fully foresighted but lack commitment power, whereas with frictions, we need to think about agents who are myopic as well. So I haven't told you all the results in the paper. I basically told you some relationships between competitive equilibrium, trail stability, and stability. But in the paper, we also discuss things like existence and other relationships between these solution concepts. So let me conclude here. Thank you all for listening.